now. It showed up in the Wall Street crash of 2008, and it's clear where the problem lies for that, namely in the banks and Wall Street and so on, who were just using all kinds of maneuvers to build up the stocks and derivatives and so on, right? So we know where the problem lies, but really that was just the latest bubble of a series of bubbles going back to the 70s, because what happens in our economy with the monopolies at the top, the many huge companies that control the economy of the U.S., is that they accumulate so much extra money, they don't know what to do with it. They can't find outlets to invest in. And so way back, there was a debt crisis in the 80s, and then there was the Third World crisis in 97 from banks here shipping money over there and then pulling it out. And so then the dot-com, and then the most recent one. So ultimately, for me anyway, the issue has to do with the way the economy is organized and kind of the rules that we operate by. And so that along with all these shifts of the past 30 years, the rich have clearly gotten richer and the poor have clearly gotten poorer. And meanwhile, there's been what some call a capital strike, namely that there's a lot of money out there in the banks and in the hedge funds and in the corporations, and they're not investing it. Right. And if that's the case, then you end up with unemployment, you end up with a stagnant economy, and we're dealing with that here in North Carolina, just the same as elsewhere around the country. So.
That ultimately means, though, as a consumer society, people won't be able to consume. And the society has been built on consumerism to a great degree. So if you don't have money over a period of time, you don't have jobs, you don't have employment, what happens to the consumer society? Where do you go, where do you go from there?
You end up with,
I mean, we're not manufacturing either.
Right, well, but you end up with people not being able to buy back all of the products that have been made through industry and services. They can't buy it back, and that's because of this vast inequality. The U.S. is the most unequal country of all the industrial countries, and the top 1% owns 45% of all the financial stocks out there. Right. Their wealth is comparable to the bottom 90% of the society put together. And when you're in that situation, the people at the bottom, the vast majority of people, even those that are sort of getting along, still don't have enough to buy back everything that's been produced because we have such a productive economy. It shows the irrationality of the kind of economic system we live in.
It is irrational.
It is irrational.
And, the thing that gets me is there's a tendency to blame the victims. We talked about the fact that just the bonuses alone that the bankers took in, not their salaries, but their bonuses alone could bail out every single state that's in debt in the United States, and yet they're not going to do that. They're not doing that. Let's talk a little bit about that distribution of wealth, because what does distribution of wealth mean? What is the meaning of that? Either?
Well, yeah, I mean, distribution of wealth means that people who are involved in the process of producing products, who create wealth for others, whether it's through manufacturing or retail and those kinds of things, right, get a share of it. And, as Chip pointed out, that there's a small percentage of the population, those who own the corporations, the board members, some of the stockholders, they're getting all of this wealth, and the rest of the population is not getting it. And so you've got this unequal distribution. I was just thinking about what's happening in Wisconsin. We talk about the public sector there, but reported in the Wall Street Journal last week that the CEO for Harley Davidson, I think, drew down about maybe $6.2 million last year in all of his, salaries and benefits and bonuses and that kind of stuff. Yet at the same time, he put pressure right, on the government of Wisconsin to give all these concessions and incentives for them to keep the company there. This is one of the main manufacturing companies. So you see where they're pulling out more and more profits and whatnot, and putting the squeeze on people. And we're talking about now a time where everybody's talking about shared responsibility, and everybody's got to try to
not sharing
do
of
that,
the money.
but not sharing the money. And I think it's a reasonable thing to ask that everybody try to help and pitch in. But when you're not asking those with all of the wealth to give a greater share like they used to in taxes, then it's really just talk and not moving towards a solution at all.
Let's talk about how wealth creates wealth, because I listened to one of the broadcasters talking about the need for older Americans, for example, to privatize Social Security and to put your money into investments, and you could get this return on your money and so on. And of course that seems a little ridiculous to me, because most people on Social Security don't have extra money, you know. But let's talk about how wealth gets from one generation to the next. And Chip, you really alluded to that quite a bit in your book.
Well, it's important. And so the inequality that occurs now is going to get passed on to future generations, just like people in, you can go back to the Homestead Act of 150 years ago, right? And the distribution of all that land to overwhelmingly white people. And then the GI Bill after World War II was unevenly implemented, so only a small number of African Americans, for example, were able to take advantage of it. So you have these accumulated benefits, and meanwhile, on the other side, things like Social Security and other benefits during the 30s were held back from domestic workers and agricultural workers. So in all of this now, people get ahead after World War II, and then they make enough that they can, help their kids out to get a house. And depending on where they live and all right, the values of the houses will go up or down, and that tends to cut along racial lines often. And so as a result, the inequality in one generation gets passed on to the next.
So the poor pass on poverty to their children and their grandchildren. Basically, that's what it boils down to.
Yeah. And even in terms of this wealth, I always think about it when you talk about the kind of condition of African descendants here in this country. You can think of fractions and proportions and numbers. So you were 4/5 of a person originally in a constitution, but you can apply those kind of fractions to what things look like on the ground. So in terms of wealth, right now, given this process that Chip talked about, right, that African Americans have about 10 cents to the dollar that whites have in terms of wealth. And if you take it to what we talked about earlier in terms of income, about 57 cents, right, in terms of African Americans compared to $1 of whites. So you got those disparities all along. It's in wealth, it's in income, it's in wages. You can even look at the types of jobs that people have. Those disparities continue to be there.
It's interesting because what happens is now those who are at the lowest level in terms of jobs are out of work. And I think the great impact is occurring with educated African or people of color, African Americans and other people of color, that's that middle area that you were talking about. So you're seeing this falling off, even of those who had done well maybe 20 years ago, beginning to turn around. We did talk a little bit about Social Security. What do you want to share the either positives or the negatives that you see in terms of Social Security and what privatizing it would mean to the average American?
Well, Social Security for me is one of those things where if you listen to the dominant what's being said, you pick it up through your pores out there. Social Security's in crisis, right? Mm-hmm. It's just not true. It's a lie.
Are you telling me this is a lie?
Well, It's a
Someone's
trust
lying
fund.
to us?
It's a trust fund, and it's bringing money in each year, and it's going to do that for another roughly 20 years. And in order to protect down the road, to make sure that it keeps being in the black, right, being in surplus, you know, all they'd have to do is to lift the cap. There's a cap at $106,000 now. We all, people work and know that that 6.2% that comes out of your paycheck, nowadays, back in the day, you'd work for part of a year, and then that would stop. Now, with it $106,000, most people just end up paying 6.2% out of their income, but it stops there. So everybody making more than that is not kicking in the same weight as the people on the bottom. And all they'd have to do is take that cap off and have all these wealthy people who are making all this money pay their 6.2%, and the problem is solved.
But instead, we have plans to have people work till 70, to, you know, to do all kinds of crazy things. In other words, put more pressure, more and more pressure on those at the bottom.
Yeah, but the other side of that, though, is that if you went to a system that depended on investments, we've seen what's happened to the markets, that it's just no guarantee.
There's no guarantee.
And people really have to, you know, think about what that would really mean to them in the private sector.
In addition to, if I may just say,
Sure.
in addition to taking a whole cut out of that money and handing it over to Wall Street, the brokers are salivating to get their hands on the Social Security money. And it's just a handout to that whole sector that's already getting too much.
They've already proven what they'll do. So we're going to have to close in a few minutes. I just wanted to know if you, do you know how many North Carolinians are actually in unions? We don't have public employees, you know. North Carolina and Mississippi don't allow public employees to
well, North Carolina,
bargain.
well, on the first part of the question, 3.2% of employed North Carolinians belong to a union. It's the lowest union density in the country. The relationship to Mississippi is that for years we would go back and forth between the two states who had the lowest, and right now we're at the lowest. It's
We're
the
at
lowest
the lowest.
point.
We're lower than Mississippi.
We're lowest in the country. But the lowest 7 states, though, and I think this is an important thing, are also in the South.
Right.
North Carolina happens to be not only the lowest in that, but also has a law that prohibits public employees from bargaining collectively.
Right.
It's North Carolina Statute 9598. And it's been on the books since 1959. It was passed during the Jim Crow era, and it's had a profound impact on public employees here. Because if you think about the public employees in the country, right now I think about 35% of those that belong to unions are in the public sector. Right. In the private sector, it's somewhere between 6 and 7%. So there's been this tremendous shift over the last 25 years. And that's what makes it so important to look at Wisconsin and Indiana and Ohio, where they're trying to destroy collective bargaining for public employees.
Okay. We're running out of time, and I'm sorry we didn't get to other questions. You guys are going to have to come back again. Wanted to talk about Japan, the impact of the meltdown, but we're out of time, and I'm really sorry, but we thank you so much for being here. Before we close out, we do want to extend our sympathies to the many who have suffered and those who will suffer from the results of the earthquakes and tsunami and nuclear fallout that is occurring in Japan. We cordially invite you to attend our meetings and welcome you to become a member and support the work we do. Please come to our next meeting. The Cumberland County Progressives will meet on Saturday, April 16th at 2 p.m. at the Bordeaux Library, Village Drive in Fayetteville. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you real soon. Our show is brought to you by Roderick Lewis, the chair and producer, Nancy Shakir, Director of Communications, Sherry Kropp of Time Warner Cable. Thanks so much, guys. It was...
Okay.
Thank you.
Keep on.